You are now listening to part one of my interview with Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to stick around the next few weeks when we release part two of our conversation with the Chief Law Enforcement Officer here in Polk County. Our sheriff has a lot to offer our listeners and our community, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Hello, America, and welcome to this inaugural edition of Todd's podcast. I'm your host, Todd Dantzler. Folks, you're in for a real experience today. Our guest is no other than Grady Judd, the sheriff of Polk County. Many of you know him through his colorful and informative press conferences. Some of you know him through his service to our citizens, and some of you have actually benefited from his generous philanthropy. I know him as a friend, and I want you to enjoy our time together today during this episode. My goal is for you to get to know the man and not just our sheriff. Grady Judd began his career at the Polk Sheriff's Office in 1972 as a dispatcher. After transferring to the patrol division in 1974, he quickly progressed up through the ranks and holding every rank from sergeant to colonel. In 2004, Grady was overwhelmingly elected as sheriff of Polk County. That's 19 years ago.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. He's the past president of the Florida Sheriff's Association and the Major County Sheriffs of America, which is the national organization serving counties with a population of 500 or more. Grady has been married to Marissa since 1972. They have 2 adult sons and 13 grandchildren. 13 grandchildren, is that right?
Last time I counted.
All right, that's amazing. So the whole goal today is for people to get to know you a little bit better and not just the public persona. So tell us about your childhood. Where did you grow up? What did you do? Were you athletic? Were you academic? How did you grow up?
Certainly, I'm a product of Polk County. I was born and raised in Lakeland, graduated from the Lakeland High School.
Good for you.
And so all of my roots are here in the county, and I love Polk County. I wanted to be in law enforcement and wanted to be the sheriff from the time I was a little bitty fella.
Really?
Yes. In fact, today, the date we're recording this, July the 21st, is my 51st year. 51 years ago today, I started at the sheriff's office as a dispatcher at only 18 years old. So I started living my dream that I'd had since a child. And I really believe it's my mission field. I think it's God-directed because I never wanted to do anything else. And Sheriff Brannon at the time hired me.
Monroe Brannon.
He
was a classic here in Polk County.
He certainly was. And at 19 years of age, he sent me to the police academy and I went on the road. They had changed the legal age from 21 to 18. They said you could be a law enforcement officer at 19. Okay. So Sheriff Brannon allowed me to do that. So I was the first deputy sheriff in the history of the county under the age of 21 when he swore me in at only 19.
How long was Sheriff Brannon our sheriff?
He was our sheriff for 16 years.
And are you the longest serving sheriff that we've had at 19 years and counting?
I am the longest serving sheriff, and I've been the longest serving sheriff since last January. Yep. Sheriff Crow was appointed halfway through a term.
Correct.
And then he did 4 terms.
Okay.
So I'm the first sheriff in the history of the county elected to 5 terms. And after January of this year, I became the longest serving sheriff of Polk County. And by the way, not that I want to do too much politicking here, but I am going to run for sheriff. Fantastic. And I certainly hope that the people will allow me to keep my job. So I'll be filing paperwork a little later this year.
And people don't understand the significance of that as showing that consistency of leadership, not just in the sheriff's office. We've had it in, the last 10, 15 years as our county manager. Our constitutionals have been the same thing. People underestimate Polk County, in my opinion. They either look down on us or discount us, and they don't understand the professionalism that manages the operations and the day-to-day operations of our county.
No, that's absolutely correct. When you think about it, you were one of our great county commissioners, and you still would be, except for term limits on the commissioners. But you can't have professionalism if you're changing direction.
Right.
And if you're politically bogged down instead of doing what's right. So because of wonderful county commissioners such as yourself and those that are there now, they said, hey, let the professionals be professional. Sheriff Crow had an 18-year run as sheriff. And I'm in my 19th year, and certainly we will extend that out if the good Lord sees fit and the voters will allow it next year. And there's a process, there's a system of professionalism, and there's not this topsy-turvy, hey, I'm getting elected, I'm going to have my good old boys here. That just does not work in modern America. So Polk County is really unique and professional. Yep. And when you look at our county government and you look at our constitutional officers, consistency and professionalism abound.
And I'm going to take those two compliments you gave me, is that I'm your favorite commissioner that you've ever served with.
In my entire life, and I don't understand why. Is there some point in time you can run again? You've been out a term or two.
Yeah. My favorite answer is I would always ask Jim Freeman that, our county manager, who was the only manager I had when I was there. And I said, I would always do it in public just to see what kind of answer I'd get. I said, who's your favorite commissioner? He said, Todd, you're my second favorite one. All the others are tied for first. And I said, okay, you got me there. So I quit asking that, except when I was in the elevator. So what did you do in high school? Did you participate in athletics? Were you running from the law? Were you running to the law?
Yeah, that's interesting. I played football in junior high school, as it was called back in the day, and I love sports.
What position?
I played the line, believe it or not. I was a skinny fella, but, I was a lineman. So I got to high school. I could kick pretty good. And I was trying out for the team. And my dad was a hunter and a fisherman, and that's what we did a lot.
Good.
So he didn't care for sports. And by the time I got to high school, it was evident that I was not the quality to play sports. So I asked the coach one day, I said, Coach, my dad loves hunting and fishing. He's not big into sports. And, I want to play football at the high school level. And he said, if I didn't play sports, he'd help me get a motorcycle so I didn't have to ride the bus. But if I played sports, I had to ride the bus. Now, Coach, I'm willing to ride the bus. And the coach said, son, you need to go get that motorcycle. So I knew then that I didn't have the talent.
Your fate was sealed.
Yes. I didn't. If I couldn't play the game, I didn't want to sit on the bench. So at the end of the day, one of the attributes, maybe the most important other than taking me to church and leading me to Christ, my dad taught me a work ethic. Yep. And he told me hard work wins out over brains every time. So he said from the time I was 12 years old, I was delivering papers, I was mowing yards, because it was that kind of responsibility. And then he came home one day and he announced to me, he said, at 15, I had my motorcycle, son, I have found you a job. And he said, you're going to work for Sam Averett. Well, those of you who know Sam Averett knows he owns a septic tank company.
Is he number one in the number two business?
Number one in the number two business. So I went to work for him part-time.
Okay.
Because I was going to work if I was going to live in my dad's house. Now, at Sam Averett's, we did three things. We built septic tanks, we installed septic tanks, and we pumped septic tanks. When the best job of the three is pumping septic tanks, you know how bad it is.
I was going to say that had to have been number three, but that was the best job.
That's the best job of the three. It was very, very hard labor. And you can imagine today in the hot sun doing that, whether you're building them around all the grease and the concrete and the big forms, or installing them out in the sun. So anyway, make a long story short, I tell Dad, this is a terrible job. So I've done it now about a year. I'm 16 years old. And a friend of ours from church comes back from the military. He's about 22. He gets out. He does his 4-year hitch. And I asked him what he does. He says, well, I dispatch for an ambulance company. In those days, it was private ambulance.
Right.
So I said, wow, that's pretty awesome. I said, what do you make? He says, $1.65 an hour, which was minimum wage. And I thought, well, he makes the same thing I do. And he sits in an air-conditioned room and talks on a radio and answers a telephone.
Right.
I think I can do that. So I went to the boss down there. I hung out with the guy and saw how he did it. And the boss said, "Hey, kid, I can't hire you till you're 18. I said, "Well, can I work part-time?" He said, "No." So I said, "Well, can I hang out and learn how to dispatch anyway? It's interesting." He said, "Sure." I learned how to dispatch. Well, one night somebody didn't show up for work, and he let me dispatch. And then he hired me as a dispatcher. And then I found out back in the day, this was before EMTs and paramedics, to work on an ambulance as an ambulance attendant, you only had to have an advanced first aid card.
Yep.
So I went to the American Red Cross and got me an advanced first aid card. And I said, "Hey, can I ride third man on the ambulance?" And they go, "Sure." So I rode third man on the ambulance. And sure enough, one night somebody didn't show up and I got to ride on the ambulance. And the next thing you know, in high school, in my junior and senior year, I worked on the ambulance. And quite frankly, it was very fulfilling. It was archaic compared to today, but we saved lives. We made a positive difference. I like to tell everyone that I delivered my first baby when I was 16 years old. Now, I'm scarred for life, by the way, from that experience. But I did that, and that was through high school. I tried to apply to work for the sheriff's office before I graduated from high school. Brad Owens, back in the day, was a personnel director. He said, "Son," he said, "you can't work here until you have a high school diploma." I said, "Well, can I go ahead and file my application?" He said, "No, you can't." So I graduated on a Friday night. I started Polk Community College in the police science program the next week.
Right.
On Monday morning, just as soon as I could get to a photocopy machine or whatever we had in those days, I took my information from high school and filed my application with the sheriff's office. Brad was not very encouraging. He looked at me and said, "We just had an 18-year-old kid that worked here in the radio room, and he acted like an 18-year-old kid, and we had to fire him. I don't think the sheriff's going to hire any more 18-year-old kids." And I said, "Well, Mr. Owens, please don't judge me by him."
Right.
And he goes, I said, "I really want to work here." He said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I'm going to be the sheriff one day and I need to get started." Now, I'm 18 years old, and you can imagine what he
Making
thought.
$1.65 an hour.
Making $1.65 an hour. So I knew people at the sheriff's office because of my work on the ambulance.
Right.
And I said, "Hey, can I go hang out there?" So they talked to the captain of communications, and he goes, "Sure." And I went there and I hung out, and I stayed all night. And I told the captain the next morning, I said, "I really want to work here." And Brad Owens won't let me. He said, "Well, son, you're still a little young." So I hung out through June and July. And the captain came in one morning and he said, "Son, how long are you going to hang out in this communications center?" Or he said, "This radio room is what they called it in the day." And Todd, I told him, "I'm going to hang out here till you hire me." Well, on this day, 51 years ago, they hired me.
That is amazing. But I think it just goes to show being prepared, showing up every day, ready to accept whatever comes your way, to being flexible is a great philosophy to advancement in your career and in your life. So I think that's a wonderful story. And I remember there was a party. It might have been one of your birthday parties, but it was at the Bartow Civic Center, and they showed a picture of you with an ambulance, as a young kid, with your coach's shorts, your tube socks almost up to your knees, a knit shirt, and it was you standing out there. And they said that was one of your first times, being in public service. So I think that's absolutely amazing.
Well, and one of the calls that I went on back in the day, and Mark wouldn't mind me telling you this, he's a dear friend of mine today, Overstreet's. Charlie Mack Overstreet, who's now passed away, and Mark Overstreet, big cattleman. And Mark had an accident where a gun fell out of a rack and shot him in the back.
Oh, my.
And when he was only 19 years of age, and I was 17 at the time working on the ambulance. Well, I received the call, and we went to he was rushing to the hospital. We were rushing to him. So we met him at Dean Still and Highway 98 North. I'll never forget. And here's a kid about my age with a big hole in his back, and he's bleeding to death. He's dying in front of me. And he looked at me and he said, "You can't let me die. I can't die." And I told him, "We're not going to let you die. We're going to take you to the hospital. You'll be all right." He said, "I can't feel my legs." And I said, "I know, but you're going to be okay." Well, that was, 52, 53 years ago.
Yep.
Mark Overstreet and I are still big buddies, and he is a great man and a great cattleman. And it was just an honor to save his life. And I kid him that, it cost $1.65 to save your life, because that was what I was making, minimum wage.
You got saved on a budget.
On a budget.
There you go.
Todd's podcast is sponsored in part by SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate. Since 1996, the firm has offered unrivaled brokerage services throughout Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. With over 90 expert advisors throughout the region, our team has the knowledge and resources to help clients realize their most ambitious real estate investment goals. When you choose SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate, you have access to a diverse suite of commercial and land services, including forestry consulting, land management, auctions, property management, commercial leasing, and negotiating conservation easements. If you're seeking to invest in land or explore commercial real estate opportunities in the Southeast, contact us today at svnsaunders.com or call 877-518-5263 to connect with an advisor today. Once again, that's svnsaunders.com or by phone at 877-518-5263.
I want to talk a little bit about the public side of you and your persona, how it's kind of come about. It seemed like the first experience that a lot of people had was after the tragedy of Matt and Diogi and all that went on with that.
Yes.
And your comment was, we ran out of, why did you shoot him so many times? We ran out of bullets. And that seemed to be like the first time that you were bigger than just Polk County. I've seen you do a press conference. You drugged me into one when I was out on Executive Drive. And, people see the 15 or 20 second soundbite, but they don't know what all goes into you being prepared for that. I know each incident is different, but when you're out in the field, tell us how you go about being educated by your investigators, your deputies, your detectives to prepare you for, and the press conferences are 20, 25 minutes easily, and they pull out that soundbite that they seem to do.
Absolutely. The thing that's interesting to me is the most important thing we do is communicate. And if you don't communicate with your bosses, and that
Correct.
is the people who hire you or the people who elect you, then they don't know what you're doing. I have the most professional staff that anyone in this world could ever ask for.
And I would agree with that. I've been around them enough. I am so, from your deputies up to your chiefs to your civilians.
My deputies, my detectives, my detention folks, and my inner staff in the office of the sheriff are simply the very best. But a horrible, tragic event occurs, and I have briefings before I go to talk to the media. And they have all the information. One of the things that gets traditional law enforcement agencies in trouble with the community is they won't tell them anything.
Correct.
And that didn't work then. It really doesn't work now in the social media era, because if you don't recall, or if you don't relate information, then what I call the social media terrorists come in and just create all kinds of communication and community problems for you. So I give people the best information I have just as soon as I can after a tragic event occurs. And I tell everyone to include the media. The information I give you today is early, very early in the investigation. It's not only subject to change, but some of these details will change. So my staff gathers the information. I sit with them, and they have all of this for me in writing. For me, the magic of it is I make them read it to me. And then I write it by hand. Because for me, if I write it and they tell me, I memorize it.
Right.
That's how I can read it, but I don't memorize it as well as if I write it. And I think that comes back from my old college days.
Right.
So I write it, and when I stand up to speak to the community, whether it's social media or on television, I try to talk to folks as if I'm sitting in the living room with them and we're having a conversation.
Right.
And that is my communication style.
And I think it's also your personality comes out as well.
Well, you're absolutely right. It does come out. And what's interesting is that you don't want to see some stiff government figure. You want to see somebody that has the emotion and the concern of the tragedy or the event as it's occurred. And then I talk to people like we're best friends sitting on the couch. And it works. In fact, I have talked to 2 or 3 different students that have interned with us over the years who say that in the universities, the communication classes, they use my clips and my style to teach as one style
Right.
of talking with the community. Well, it works. I have someone say, well, where you are witty. And I go, well, my mother used to say, son, if you could put your brain in gear a half second before your mouth, you'd be a whole lot better off. So I am quick-witted by nature,
Right.
or genetics. So I try to think through it, even though it's microseconds sometimes before it comes out of the mouth. But sometimes I do get one big foot or 2 in my mouth at the same time. But I know this. When you tell people and you communicate with people and you keep people updated and you trust them, they trust you back. And I want everybody to be my new best friend, and I want to be their new best friend.
Right. Well, you've brought up a bunch of different topics I want to ask questions about, but your best friend, one day I was getting a tour of the jail with you and Chief Lester and Chief Allen, and we were standing there, and this one guy that was in a cage getting ready to go back to his cell, he goes, "Hey, are you Grady Judd?" And you said, "Yes, sir, I am." He said, "I just took a class from the jail. Can you come over and give me your autograph?" And this guy was in jail, and he still wanted your autograph. And I said, "Steve, is this like a regular thing?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "It's amazing." And but that's a little bit on the side, I'm sorry. But you had mentioned about professionalism. And I saw it firsthand for the 8 years I was a county commissioner and started paying attention to this stuff. Is it something you teach? Is there a structured program? Does it start from your chiefs and work all the way down? Is it something you're constantly harping on, or do you just lay it out and expect everybody to rise to the occasion?
Sure. It is all of the above. Leadership starts at the very top.
Yep.
It's not do as I say, it's do as I do. So if I want my deputies to be professional, I need to first be professional. If I want them to be educated, I need to first be educated. If I want them to treat people and talk to people like they would want their mother treated and talked to, then that's how I need to respond. And that's how I do. I call it systems and processes. You don't get what you expect, you get what you inspect. You get what you teach. So the magic of running the professional, administrative, internal side of this is you cannot be a sergeant or a lieutenant or the civilian equivalents on our civilian side without having a bachelor's degree.
Right.
You can't be a captain, a major, or a chief without a master's degree. Now, we pay for that.
Right.
And then we pay you to have that. But if you want to be in supervisory ranks, you have to be formally educated. Because the first thing you get when you come to work with the sheriff's office, if you come to work as a deputy, you get training and education. Then we want you to have your college education. And we know this, that when people are educated, they have more tools on their tool belt. They're not smarter than the people without
Correct.
a college education at all, but they have more tools. And it teaches you critical thinking.
Yep.
It teaches you that there's more than one right answer. It teaches you how to run a professional organization. So that's the standard. And we do not deviate from that at all. But I would like to hearken back to the inmate that asked for my signature. When you get a formally trained group of folks, you want them to have education, experience, and then they get wisdom. Part of wisdom is not getting too big for your britches. I had a friend of mine one time that said, it's important never to build your house bigger than your barn. And my attitude is everybody puts their pants on one leg at the time. So this inmate in jail asked for my autograph, and I obviously gave it to him. I had a group of trustees, inmates in the county jail, and we were having a volunteer luncheon. We have 3,000 volunteers, and I do a luncheon once a year and thank them. And you've been there.
I've been to them.
And at the conclusion, then I have the trustees, help clean up. Well, I have been taking pictures with the volunteers and recognizing them for their hours of service. And I had one of the trustees say, "Sheriff, can I have my picture with you?" I said, "Well, sure." So here's me in uniform with the trustee in a jail uniform, and they're taking pictures. Well, the detention supervisors are having a fit. No. And I go, "Calm down." So then others of the detention, those in detention, wanted their picture, and I invited them over to take pictures. Then I autographed them, and I mailed them to their house. I didn't send them back to the jail. And I had a coaching session after that. I said, "Folks, we are going to be very sensitive and very engaging with everybody because everybody's God's children.
Right.
And if they care enough to want my autograph or a photograph with me, then I'm going to care enough to do that. And y'all are too. But it's one of those coaching moments. So let's fast forward. It was 6 months, 8 months, a year later. I had a lady come up to me at a public event. And she said, "Sheriff, can I talk to you a second?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "You took your picture with my son when he was in your jail."
Wow.
And she said, "It's hanging on my wall today at the house. I'm so proud of him, and he's not been back in trouble since." So you never know that the seeds you plant today, if and when, they'll germinate. Most will. So at the end of the day, the bottom line to this is we are servants of the people.
Right.
And I'm a servant, and I love it. And I always want to spend time with people. There's this aura that some political figures want to put out that, I'm up here at a pedestal.
We all know who they are.
Yes, we know who they are. I don't want to be on any pedestal. I want to be down with the people and my arms around them, thanking them for allowing me to serve them.
And I know you've probably got one of the more stressful jobs in the county. Maybe outside of Steve Lester, your chief of staff, and Tina, your executive assistant, trying to maintain and corral you. How do you cope with this stress? I've been to 2 or 3 funerals of when deputies were killed. Did not know them, but by the time the funeral was over, the words that you said, I said, "Man, I wish I could go have a beer with that guy or that gal." Just phenomenal. The whole ceremony was solemn. I remember seeing you after a fairly horrific event. You were in your office. It was late. You looked exhausted. I mean, you did. I mean, everybody gets tired, and you just said it's been a tough week. And I said, "Are you getting out of here?" How do you blow off steam? What do you do to decompress? I know you do photography, but is there anything that you really do just to kind of manage yourself on that?
Well, first and foremost, it's important to understand that being sheriff or working in law enforcement is not just a career. It's not just a job, but it's way of life, because you can't turn it on and you can't turn it off. So at the end of the day, you recognize that there's going to be stressful days. And of course, the higher up you get in the organization, the more stress there is. Because you start off, you have your individual stress.
Correct.
Then you have the stress of a small function of the sheriff's office. By the time you get to the top, it's relatively stressful every day. You know, I came into the office about 6 months ago, and I looked at Chief Lester, who's my chief of staff, and the greatest man God's ever put on the face of this earth, I believe.
Yep, we went to high school together.
Yep. And I said, do you think there's going to be just one day I can come in this office without being frustrated and holler about something? And he looked at me and said, no, sir, I don't think that day's going to ever happen. So he and Tina, who is my administrative assistant, are simply the best. But I've got a team of chiefs and majors and captains.
And chaplains.
And they all do the heavy work. So I've learned over the years, and I learned early on, that you're either going to learn to manage this or you can't work in law enforcement. Right. And I've learned to manage it. And I have my photography. I love outdoor and nature photography. You know, I'm a very conservative person, but I'm a dadgum tree hugger. I love the woods. Yep. I love the land. I love the lakes. I love everything God created out here. And that's where I go to get away from it. I like to hunt. And today, on my 51st anniversary, my wife really treated me with like my biggest toy ever. She's bought me a tractor. So I'll be back. I used to ride tractors back in the day before I got so busy. I used to ride tractors and bush hog a little bit. Mm-hmm. And that's, for those of you who have never done that, it is a great stress relief. So
it's a way to put your mind in neutral.
It is.
And not have to think what's right in front of you so you don't run over something or.
It absolutely is. And but I've learned to manage it. And I think we're going to talk about Marisa, who's my wife.
Yep.
You know, I married my first wife when I was 18, just out of high school. Well, she's my current wife.
Yep. And your trophy wife, I will add.
And my trophy wife. Yes, absolutely. And I think the entire world, evolves around her. And she helps a lot because she'll tell me occasionally, you're in overload. And I go, no, I'm good. She said, no, you're in overload. I think you need to tell them to push Friday, and you need to get your camera and go out in the woods or on the lake or something. So she's simply the very best.
And, and I agree with that. I think she's a rock star. I think she manages you well and that part of your personal life. I've seen y'all at public events together. You work as a team, absolutely as a team. I've seen her kind of protect. I've seen her enhance. I've seen her do whatever the role is. And she's never been anything but incredibly gracious to me. If she sees me from across the room, she will walk over and say hello to me. It doesn't have to be me going over to her. So she is a lovely lady. You married way above your pay grade. And I think the fact she got you a tractor also means she wants you to start doing some work around the house.
Well, I thought maybe that was the ulterior motive as well. But Todd, you're exactly right. She's the wind beneath my wings. She graduated from Auburndale High School.
Really?
She sure did. And I met her working on the ambulance. The boss bought into the Winter Haven ambulance, and I had to work there on the weekends. And that's where I first met her. And people say, you're crazy. And yeah, maybe it helps. But when she came to the ambulance office one day with a girlfriend of hers, whose boyfriend wanted to work there, and he was riding third man with us.
Right.
And he called his girlfriend up, hey, would you bring us lunch? And she said, sure, but I'm working on this Sevenettes project. Marisa, my wife, was the president of Sevenettes and was also a cheerleader with his girlfriend. So Marisa came, and she wasn't going to, but they said, hey, there's guys there. Let's go. So as she's walking up the sidewalk to the office, I looked at her and I think, gosh, I'll just marry her. I'd never spoken a word to her at that point. And see, that's why I think it's a God thing. Now, I mentioned that to her. She agreed to go out on a date with me. I mentioned that to her after, a date or two. Why don't we get married? And she looked at me and said, "Are you just nuts?"
After a date or two?
Oh, yeah, after a date or two. This was in September, between our junior, or I guess just starting our senior year. I was engaged to her by Christmas, and we have been high school buddies, and she is my everything. She just really is. But she is, I give her all the credit, but I like to share with folks, I'm maybe the boss at work, she's the boss at the house.
You know what I find very, very interesting is your life was kind of set in your teens.
It was.
With your career, with your wife and your future family. And what you've been doing is executing this plan that God's had for you, that you've had for you, that Marissa's had for you, that you two have had for each other. I find that just fascinating that all this came together at such a young age for you, where most people, I know what I was doing when I was 18. I know what I was doing when I was 20 something. And it wasn't thinking about what my career was going to be or how my life was going to be. And I think that shows a remarkable maturity on your side, a testament to how you were raised and your family as well.
I'm in total awe, as is Marisa, because we look back on this wonderful life that we've had together. And you know it's got to be God inspired. I graduated from high school in June. I didn't like high school at all.
What year did you graduate?
72. So
you're an old guy.
I am. I'm almost. But I graduated when I was 4.
Okay.
No. So I graduated in 72. The next, as bad as I hated high school, the next week I started the police science program at what was then Polk Community College.
There wasn't a Lakeland campus, and you went to Winter Haven,
I had
right?
to drive to Winter Haven from Lakeland. Married my high school, Sheriff Monroe Brannon hired me in July.
Right.
Married my high school sweetheart in September of 72. And I tell everybody, please, you got to keep electing me, because she wouldn't even marry me till I got a job at the sheriff's office. So, and we are just still creating new opportunities together, and we had 2 wonderful children. We have 13 grandchildren, and now I just number them. There's too many names to remember, but I have lived a charmed life. But I believe when you do good for others, good things happen back. And I've lived my entire life trying to help people that were less fortunate, needed help, and protecting people from bullies and criminals. That's how I live my life, and I love it.
I want to thank you for listening to part 1 of my interview with Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd. You don't want to miss the second half of my interview with Sheriff, where we discuss some of the challenges that he faces, both financial and recruiting with the Polk County Sheriff's Office and the budget constraints that are upon him. Make sure you keep an eye out, as part 2 of our interview with Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd will be released in the next few weeks. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. As always, don't forget to rate, review, follow, and subscribe to Todd's podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions for me or any suggestions for future guests, please call or text our number at 863-288-0944 or visit todddantzler.com. Again, that's 863-288-0944, or visit my website, todddantzler.com. I look forward to hearing your questions and feedback, and please take care.